Turn, I guess. Yeah, hey. Hello and welcome to UUCC. We're glad you chose to join us here today. I'm Steve Hollingsworth, pronouns optional, and I am your worship associate today. Sit with your children until the time for all ages, and those who feel comfortable can come on down front. When it's finished, we'll sing them to the religious education classes. After service, we invite you to join us in the fellowship area for coffee and conversation. I generally take personal privilege when it comes to the opening words, and I'm going to call them opening thoughts. Some of us will find material we'll hear today painful. It'll be obvious that also that really includes me personally. Jeff Krim will be shortly speaking about how he went far deeper than he first imagined to respond to McMinn County's banning the graphic novel Mouse from the public schools. It tells the Holocaust, the story of the Holocaust, in a very different way. But it was still the Holocaust and was a horror, and it came close to more people than you realize. My wife's grandparents, Isidore and Regina Springer, were murdered June 15th, 1942, in Molly Trostinitz. There had been a rumor in our family, but finding out the detailed truth was still a shock. Santa Rich Dwyer will be sharing some of the beautiful prose, poetry, and art created by children while still hopeful at the death camp Theresienstadt or Theresen. But sadly, most of the children died there. Well, fear not, from the lowest depths we have Jeff to guide us upward. Okay, lighting the chalice. Lighting the chalice is one of the most fundamental Unitarian Universalist rituals. UUs across the world, those who take the summer off excluded, are lighting their own chalices at this time, while we join here in our own community to reflect and grow spiritually. In the spirit of our community, I would like to invite Reverend Bandy Goheen as a reward for taking a busman's holiday and coming to church to hear preaching. Hey. Anyway, enough. Please join me in reading the words in your order of service. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Okay, it is now time for, oh dear, I don't have my order of service here, but it is number 298, I believe. And that is Wake Now My Senses, yes. And how could I can't personally sing that song without, choking up just a little about the verse that says, wake now, my vision of ministry clear. Okay. So I invite you to rise in body or spirit. Those who are joining us on YouTube may sing as loud as you please, and you can be off key and we'll be none the wiser. This is Santa Ridge Dwyer, who will talk about and read some selections from I Never Saw Another Butterfly.
You ever heard of The Diary of Anne Frank? No. You haven't? All right. Stand up. Turn around. Have you ever heard of The Diary of Anne Frank? Raise your hand if you have. Okay? So just about everybody in the room, you can sit back down again now. Just about everybody in the room has heard about it because it's probably the most famous book about someone reporting on a personal feelings about going through the period of time by the Nazis were gathering up Jewish folks and stuff. And she hid in an attic for the longest time in Amsterdam. She was originally from Germany, but she was in Amsterdam hiding in the attic, and she was writing a diary about what was going on during that time. And then it's been made into movies, it's been written into books and stuff like that where people have written about it. So it's a very interesting book, it's an interesting movie, and so maybe one of these days you might be able to grab one out of the library and read about it. Be cool. As you can see, a lot of other people have too. So this book that I found about just a few days ago, Steve was telling me about this, said I could talk about the Anne Frank or about this other book, and it's called I Never Saw Another Butterfly. And it was written by young children who were in a town previously known as Terezin, and it was in the Czech Republic over in Europe. And it was like a kilometer square place that was made with a big wall on the outside to keep away people that might be barbarians or something like that, mostly Germans at the time. And as it turns out, the Germans pretty much took it over and turned it into what they called a ghetto. And it was meant to have about, maybe 4,000 people living in it. They ended up with something like 60,000 people. And they had them all stacked up in, like, you've probably seen a bunk bed before, haven't you? Like got one on the bottom and one on top, and you got a ladder. Well, add another layer. And that was pretty much what they had. They had 3 layers, so people had to come down. There's even one of the stories that I'm going to read about, this little boy didn't want to get sick because he might fall out of his bed. So if you fall out of that 3rd layer, that'd be a pretty long time falling. So this one is a diary that a young person wrote while she was in there called Lights Out. It said 3 young boys ran away.
Rich, give me the page number.
Okay. 22. And I don't think, you might want to just show the last part. That's the only one that's got any. Oh, yeah, right there. Called Lights Out. 3 young boys ran away. For that, we already had a week of confinement to barracks. The barracks is where they all stayed. Each little place was a barracks. And lights out. We walk only in columns to work, and after 6 o'clock in the evening, no one is allowed on the street. We came home from work in the dark. In the morning, we go to work in the dark. We dress and undress by the touch system. Our windows must be darkened, and it is forbidden to have any sort of light. Tomorrow, I'm going to the Hamburg barracks for bread, and perhaps I'll manage to see Mom. So it sounds like they separated the children from their parents. Confinement has been canceled. This is a diary that's going on. So confinement has been canceled. The lights out continues, and evidently for the whole winter. So we have to save on electricity. Each of the different blocks get it every third day in turn. We may use candles for light, but that doesn't last long. Supplies from home are being used up and we can't manage to get more. It's terribly stupid. We can't even read in the evening. Without light, everything is so sad and gloomy. I'm an awfully homesick for Prague, and that's where she was from. Evening after evening, Franca and I recall things in Prague far into the night, and often we dream of it in our sleep. Last night I had a beautiful dream. I dreamed that I was at home. I saw quite clearly our flat and street. Now I'm disappointed and out of sorts because I woke in the bunk instead of my own bed. But maybe this was some sort of omen of an early end. Then there should be a permanent lights out all over Germany. All right, another story. Old people's transport, 10,000 sick, crippled, dying, all of them over 65 years old. It's horrible everywhere. The rays of sun fall exactly on my bunk and I reach on further. I try in vain to get away from them into the shade. Today I shan't go and report for service. I haven't left out a day yet, but I'm too exhausted to stand the sight of misery and suffering again. The old people's transport, the young people cannot volunteer. Children have to let their old parents go off and we can't help them. Why do they want to send these defenseless people away? If they want to get rid, and see here's a picture here, there's a man that's checking this woman's hair for lice. And generally speaking, even if they did find hair or didn't find hair, they ended up chopping off all their hair so they'd go around bald-headed for a while. That way they wouldn't have lice. Not a good way of taking care of that, don't you think? That if they want to get rid of us young people, I can understand that. Maybe they're afraid of us and don't want us to give birth to any more Jewish children. But how can these old people be dangerous? If they had to come here in Terezin, isn't that enough? Can't they let them die in peace here? After all, these old people can't hope for anything else. And the barracks, this is another day, the barracks by the physical culture hall must be cleared out. A special dinner is being cooked, and the reception center is getting ready. They say some Polish children are coming. This is all incomprehensible. Why and how does it happen that they are brought here from Poland? They came yesterday at 5 o'clock. No one is allowed near them. In the night, they called some nurses, guards, and doctors. Besides these, no one else is allowed near their barracks. You can see them a little from the fortress wall, because you remember this wall was a huge wall that went around them. It was like a castle. And then they went in the morning to the reception center. They are all bare-legged, and only a very few have shoes. They return from the reception center with their heads shaved. They have lice. They have all such frightened eyes. Yesterday they were taken care of, doctors, nurses, and guards with them. Where they came from, we never found out, nor where they were taken. Rumors are circulating about deportation to Palestine, but no one believes this. They have gone. All that is left is a few lines scribbled on the walls of the barracks that hardly anyone can figure out. If you would show that last page. 24. And so this is from the diary of Helga, I'm going to tear this last word up, Weissova. And this is what she was writing about. And so here is some stuff where people were scribbling on the walls and things like that. This next one is on page 30. It's called Illness. Really no pictures with this. Just a short one, and it just says, sadness, stillness in the room, In the middle, a table and a bed. In the bed, a feverish boy. His mother sits next to him with a little book. She reads him his favorite story, and immediately the fever subsides. This was written by Franta Bass. But I'm wondering if this is what really this young person was seeing, or would this maybe not the fever had left him, but maybe that child's life had left them. This is the view from a young child, and as best they understand what's going on in this crazy world that's called a concentration camp. This last one is called A Letter to Daddy. And it is on, oops.
36, I got it.
You got it, okay. And as best as I can tell, that's his drawing of his daddy. He must have had a big mustache. So Mama told me to write to you today, but I had no time. New children arrived with the latest transport, and I had to play with them. I didn't notice the time pass. I live better these days. I sleep on my own mattress on the floor so I will not fall down. You remember those three, things, the bunk beds. At least I don't have much work to fix up my bed. In the morning, I see the sky from my window. I mean, he's thinking that's pretty good stuff to be able to have his own mattress on the floor and being able to see out and see the sun come up. Yeah. I was coughing a bit, but I don't want to get sick, for I am happy when I can run in the courtyard. Tonight, there will be gathering like the ones at the scout camp at the summer. We will sing songs we know. A girl will play the accordion. I know you wonder how we fare here, and you would surely like to be with us now. The kid's pretty optimistic, it seems, no matter what seems to be going on. And something else, Daddy. Come soon and have a more cheerful face. When you're unhappy, Mama is sad, and then I miss the sparkle in her eyes. You promised to bring me books today. Truly, I have nothing to read. Oh, please, come tomorrow right before dusk. I will surely be grateful for this. Now I must stop. Mama sends you her love. I will rejoice when I hear your footsteps in the hall. Until you are with us again, I send you my greetings and kisses. It says your faithful son. They don't have a person who signed that, but these are some of the things that some children wrote that were inside of this horrible place. They wrote, they drew things, and this one saying, I never saw a butterfly again because they were inside of these places that had no butterflies. And, Anne Frank wrote a story about herself and hiding and all that. This book that I noticed it was available on Amazon and, things like that. It's an amazing story of perseverance, but out of these kids that were in there, and there was something like thousands of them, there was only one, and none of them were 14 or less. Everybody else was older than that, and one, he was right, he was above 14. The rest of them didn't make it, young as all that. So it was a terrible time. Thank you for being such a good listener.
We bring our full selves to this service every week. Our busy selves, our happy selves, our sad selves, and our joyous selves. Let's take a moment now to be still and calm our thoughts, to forget the past and future that don't truly exist, and be here in this moment together. Follow the sound of the chime into our moment of silent meditation. The chime will sound once more to bring us out of our silence. We now invite you to come up and light a candle for those joys or concerns. Rev Mandy will help you, and at the end, we'll light 2 more candles, one for the joys or concerns that remain unspoken, another for those concerns of our remote viewers on YouTube. guess I will give you the shortest possible introduction to UUCC's absolute favorite Lutheran minister, Reverend Jeff Krim. Take it away, Jeff.
Well, Steve said from the depths, Pastor Krim will lift you up. That's not, like, you set the bar pretty high, Steve. I'm sorry. We should have talked to me about that one ahead of time. No, for those of you who don't know me, it's been a couple years since I've been here. My name is Jeff Krim, and currently I'm the pastor of Ascension Lutheran Church, which is just a couple blocks up the road, and a chaplain at Memorial Hospital. But as a kid, I went to this church. And so it's always a treat for me to be invited here. This is the third time you guys have invited me. I figured the first was a mistake and the second was a fluke, but you must like me to have me back a third time. I always love coming back here because I do, even though the place where I ended up seems very different from here, I do owe this congregation quite a bit in my spiritual formation and in where I've ended up. So thank you for having me back one more time. And I always, well, when you're a Lutheran pastor, coming up with what to talk about on Sunday morning is pretty easy, because we have this thing called the Revised Common Lectionary, and so it separates the Christian scripture into a 3-year cycle. And so for any given Sunday, I get a gospel reading, I get a reading from somewhere else in the New Testament, I get a psalm, and I get a selection from the Hebrew Bible outside of the book of Psalms, all selected for me. And I just have to sit down and go, why did they think these went together? And by the time I answer that question, generally a sermon is written. When I come here, they say, well, what do you want to talk about? I don't know. But it seems that every time you call me, I've just finished doing something that seems worth talking about. But it's got to be more than story time. So I always throw out these amorphous topics, like the book Mouse, which is depicted on the front of your bulletins this morning. Confession, which is something core to my Lutheran tradition. And spiritual growth, which I took from the third principle of the UUA. We practice acceptance of one another and spiritual growth within our congregations. And so, like me preparing a Lutheran sermon for Sunday morning, you may be looking at the topic for my sermon this morning and going, how in the world does he think these three things fit together? Hopefully by the time that we're done with this, that'll be clear. I do want to say one thing at the outset, though. I want to acknowledge that the UU principles and purposes are yours. They are not part of my tradition. And so my purpose in including them is not to come in here and, I don't know, whatever the spiritual version of mansplain would be, but to explain your own traditions to you. Are you saying I should do that?
No, I'm praising you for not doing it.
Okay, yeah, that is not my purpose. My purpose in including that was in preparing something to talk to you about, to enter into your tradition and to learn from it, as I formed something to say to you rooted in my own experience and tradition. And so when I talk about that principle, It's not to explain to you what it means, but to tell you a little bit about what I've learned about my own faith from experiencing yours. Very much, how many people in here have studied a second language? What did you learn more about, especially in the first year that you studied a second language? The language you were trying to study or the language you already spoke? You learned more about the language you already spoke. At some point, when I studied French, I was like, oh, that's why that stupid who-whom rule exists. We got it from Europeans somehow. Okay. Anyway, so on to the actual sermon. And let me also say, sorry, I'm giving way too many prefaces. I got out of the hospital last week. I had a bilateral pulmonary embolism, so if I become out of breath, I'm sorry. But anyway. So last year, I got up one morning, and my plans for that day were not huge. They probably consisted of working the Wordle from the New York Times that morning, something I do every morning, and having lunch, breakfast, lunch, preparing a sermon. It was a day off, and maybe spending some time with my son. What I ended up doing that day ended up being huge. Last year, the McMinn County School Board made national headlines by banning the book Mouse from their 8th grade curriculum. They had used it for years. Well, Mouse was a very special book to me. When I was a kid, I was a comic book nerd. And some of you are probably going, oh, now it makes sense that he went here when he was in high school. I was a comic book nerd. And when I got to college, one of my friends went on a trip on fall break to Munich. And he came back with this book he'd bought in the Munich train station. And it was this graphic novel about, of all things, the Holocaust. And we were just absolutely fascinated by this book, because here was this art form that we were used to telling stories. We were used to it as sort of a recreational medium, but it was here being used to tell a very serious educational story. And this is before it went on to win the Pulitzer Prize and a whole host of other things. But I spent quite a bit of time that year in college poring over this book after my friend brought a copy home from Munich. This was only the first volume was out at that point. And I bought the second volume, and then I bought the special edition, and it just became a thing. So when McMinn County becomes national news for banning it, I get a little bit upset. And there's a group of clergy here in town that, I don't know, occasionally we like to stir things up. Mandy may or may not be part of that. I'll let her speak for herself. But there's a couple of us who know each other. And so I ended up in this phone call with a Presbyterian minister and one of the local rabbis, and we decided that we were going to hold a book discussion group about Mouse. That would be so simple. And if only I had just let it be simple. But no, I have this philosophy in life that if I don't ask for something, then I can't get it. Like if I want something and I don't ask for it, I've already gotten a no answer. So I had this brilliant idea. Let's call Art Spiegelman's agent and see if Art Spiegelman will visit by Zoom, because everybody's doing Zoom now, right? See if Art Spiegelman will visit by Zoom our book discussion group. And so I call Art's agent, and Art's agent is answering his own phone. I didn't know that. I thought I was talking to a secretary. And I start this bumbling, McMinn County, blah, 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 pastor, blah, blah, blah. And the guy says, stop. This is Stephen, Art's agent. I'm fielding media inquiries. You have 30 seconds of my time. Get it together and go. And I said, school board bad, pastors mad, rabbis mad, want to do something. And he goes, okay, now you have more than 30 seconds of my time. what do you want to do? And I said, we'd love Art to show up to this book discussion group. And he goes, no, Art's not going to do that. And I said, okay. He said, but if you plan a webinar open to everybody in East Tennessee, Art will do that. And for some stupid reason, I said yes. And so the next thing I know, my congregation, an Episcopal congregation up in McMinn County, Mizpah congregation, the Reformed Jewish congregation here in Chattanooga, and B'nai Zion, the conservative synagogue, are co-sponsoring a night with Art Spiegelman by Zoom. And it goes everywhere. Neil Gaiman was tweeting about my church, you know, like we don't know how many people actually attended, but 15,000 people registered for it. We also live streamed it on a number of websites. We don't have any way of tracking that. It became this huge thing. Took 2 weeks. Art's agent was on the phone with me every day about some tiny detail that I'm like, that doesn't really matter, but he thought it mattered. Anyway, this is an interesting story, but what does it have to do with anything besides story time? One of the phone calls that I got was from an editor at the Lutheran magazine. So the Lutheran magazine is, it's the Lutheran equivalent of the UU World. It's sort of our official magazine. Everybody in the ELCA gets it, you know, so roughly 4 million people get this magazine. And he calls me up and he says, so, a lot of people talking about your church. And I said, yes, so I've been told. And he said, you know, I like Mouse too, it's a good book. But why? Like, you're a church pastor, not a librarian, not the head of a book club. Why does this make sense for a church to do? And I said, oh, that's easy. Confession. Now, how many people get a little bit antsy when you hear me say the word confession? Okay? Also, I could also ask for a show of hands, how many people in this room are recovering Catholics? And then, now put your hands down if confession doesn't make you uneasy. My wife grew up Catholic. I work in a Catholic hospital. I share an office with our priest at the hospital. We talk about confession all the time. And ideally, it's not in anybody's tradition ever meant to be something that you get clobbered over the head with. We've done a horrible job as human beings across a number of traditions in conveying that over the past at least 2,000 years that I can speak of in my own tradition, probably since the dawn of humanity. Because confession is really a universal thing. Because having things to confess is actually pretty universal. So if you were, for example, to visit my congregation, you would notice that we begin every service with some sort of confession. And it's usually a prayer that begins with something like, we have sinned in thought, word, and deed. We have not loved our neighbors as ourselves. We used to have a prayer that said, my sin is ever before me. And I will frequently say, when it comes to gluttony, my sin is in fact ever before me. I can't get away from it. But in beginning the service that way, well, that's how we do it now. When I was in seminary, I learned that my family is not Lutheran going back. But Lutherans of my grandparents' generation would have gone to church during Lent and there would be a hymn sing going on. And then one by one, they would be invited into the pastor's office to make individual confessions. Wow, as a pastor, that scares me. I'm glad we do it the way we do it now, because it does something. It starts off the service with everybody accepting everybody else. We have all admitted our shortcomings. We have all admitted that we're not perfect. We have all admitted that we are there because we need something. We have all also acknowledged that we're there because everybody else brings something that we need. And then depending on the form of confession that we're doing, we either forgive one another or the pastor as the church's representative gives what's called a declaration of grace. But it's meant to be a form of acceptance. Acceptance of ourselves and acceptance of one another wherever we are. If you experience confession as self-loathing or as somebody beating you over the head, somebody else has done confession the wrong way and passed it on to you. So anyway, back to the story. I get this call from the Lutheran magazine. And they ask, why are you doing this? And I said, well, confession. And they said, well, what do you mean confession? I said, how comfortable are you talking about the Holocaust in Lutheran circles? And he goes, well, not very. Because the overwhelming religious identity of people in Germany prior to and during World War II was what? Lutheran. Lutheran pulpits endorsed Nazism. Lutheran people carried out the Holocaust. We get very uncomfortable when this comes up. In every church that I've belonged to, we have ethnic Germans. Mostly now, in my congregation now, it's elderly women who married American GIs at the end of the war. But in previous years, it was mostly people who moved here after the war. The German women moved here after the war too, but they typically were teenagers at the time that they came. But it gets very touchy because when we talk about it, we're not talking about what was done to us often. We love to talk about Dietrich Bonhoeffer because that recasts the whole thing, but Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one guy with like 24 students. We're talking about what our parents, our brothers, our sisters, our cousins were involved in. And I said, and we also have to deal with the fact that Martin Luther himself said some very horribly anti-Semitic things that the Nazi Party was fine with reprinting and publishing everywhere that they could. And so this understandably makes us uncomfortable. But because we consider confession to be so core to who we are, we should be willing to confront that. And we should be willing to say, yes, we were involved in that. And yes, we repent of that. And that should be a way that spurs us on to spiritual growth, or to growth of all kinds. Sorry, I am running a little short of breath. This should be a thing that spurs us on to growth of all kinds. And, sorry, give me a moment. And so, when we have the wider society trying to brush under the rug this terrible thing, this horrible injustice that was committed against humanity in general. Thank you very much. We should be among the first people standing up to say, no, you don't sweep that under the rug. We're part of that story, and we demand that you tell it. And that becomes the second part of confession. So we've already linked confession with accepting one another. This is the second part of confession. Once we've confessed, then where do we go? It frees us to no longer be bound to who we were, but to acknowledge who we were, where we came from, and to move forward. There was a good book that I ran into in looking at UU principles and purposes, and I don't remember the name of it, but I'm sure Mandy has it. And it talked about this principle, and it said we should always remember that spiritual growth is not a vertical process. It's not about becoming closer to God. It's a horizontal process as well. And so, in acknowledging our complicity in the Holocaust, and in being proactive about confronting it, we don't become more holy, but we become closer to our neighbors. Who would have guessed in 1936, if you had told somebody, one day a Lutheran pastor and a rabbi are going to work very closely together to tell this story, they would have told you were crazy. People that a generation ago would have othered each other because of confession and spiritual growth, at least from my point of view, from my tradition, are now able to see each other as neighbors and able to work together to tell a story that belongs to both of them, but a story that belongs to both of them in very, very different ways. So, and you know, we all do this. I noticed when I walked in here, this is one of my favorite things about coming here not on a weekly basis, is getting to see what's changed since the last time I was here. And when I walked in this morning, there's something new on the door. You've got this wonderful statement about acknowledging the native people on whose land this building sits. That is an example of owning a difficult part of our story. It is an example of confession, and it is an example of the type of spiritual growth that shows that people that you would have once othered, you now acknowledge as your kin, your peers, as your neighbors, as your brothers, as your sisters, as whatever metaphor you want to use. So God bless you for that. Whether you call it confession or not, please, 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 continue to improve this congregation, and by that, improve the world around you, by continuing to accept one another where you are, and pushing one another to spiritual growth. Thanks. Hope you choose to have me again.
Once a month, oh, Yeah. It's not in my script, but Jeff, thank you so much. That was wonderful. uh, yes, and yes, we'll find another fifth Sunday someday, and you will be back here. Right, folks? Is that? Yeah. All right. Once a month, we donate the plate. That is, everything we collect that is not specifically marked as a pledge payment will today go to Bridge Refugee Services, and I think we have a name here. Nate Hildebrand, that's you, good. I should have tried to coordinate this ahead of the service, but come on, tell us in 5 minutes or less why we should support Bridge.
Thank you all for having us, or having me here today. Can you hear me all right now? Perfect. Yeah. Thank you all for having me here today. I very much appreciate the words that I've heard today, the words that are in support of human rights at a very basic level. I am Nate Hildebrand, and I work at Bridge Refugee Services here in Chattanooga. We are a refugee resettlement agency that has been here in East Tennessee since about the 80s, here in Chattanooga since about the 90s. And we provide services to folks living with refugee status who are here in Chattanooga. We are a part of a network that includes the UN on one end and then ends with Bridge and other agencies like Bridge across the country on the other end. Refugees are people, just like you and I, who have a particular legal status, and that status has been granted to them because they have been forced to flee their homeland due to a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or belonging to a particular social group. There are something like 27 million people with refugee status in the world. There's something like 80 million people who have been forced to flee their homeland, but only a portion of those have actually been granted this particular legal status. That's about a quarter of the US population. So imagining a quarter of the US having to relocate and find a new home elsewhere in the world. There is incredible need. We are a small agency. Historically, we support and resettle anywhere from 80 to 100 folks here in the Chattanooga area. This year, the last time I spoke with you all was several months ago, and I shared a bit about the support for Afghans who have been relocating here in Chattanooga. Right now, we're supporting a different population, still those same folks, but in addition to them, there are about 150 Ukrainians who have relocated here in the Chattanooga area, most of whom are coming to family and friends that they already know in the area. So the types of services we're providing them are slightly different, but still, there's definitely still a need. And we are also serving about 60 Cuban entrants who have made their way to the Chattanooga area. So a different population than we've served historically, but we are glad that we are a part of a community that supports human rights and supports people as they flee their homeland and find security and safety and a community that they can flourish and thrive in and belong in. So thank you all for supporting Bridge now and for supporting Bridge in the previous years. We could not do what we do without the work of community members like you all. So thank you.
And now we acknowledge our generosity with the words in your order of service. Let's say them together. We give these gifts freely, committed to our mission to care, create beloved community, awaken hearts and minds, resist injustice and act with compassion, embrace life and care for living. To this work, we dedicate our offerings. And now, we invite you to stand in body or spirit and join your voice in our closing song, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. It's number 34 in the gray hymnal. Seated. Oh, come on. We mark our time together coming to a close by extinguishing our chalice. Rev Mandy, will you please come up and put out, come up to put out the flame as we recite the words in your order of service? Oh, you're what? But, sorry. These we carry in your hearts and share with all. Sorry about that. I have too many places to look. I spent some time in our Singing the Living Tradition UU hymnal, that's the gray book you've been opening, looking for what we have to say about confession. In the indexes in the back, only one index has a heading of confession, and that's for the readings. And there was only one entry there. I found that a little bit surprising, but maybe given who we are, not that surprising. But nonetheless, I would like to share with you the one confession that is in the hymnal. If you wish to follow along, it's number 496. The title isn't listed there, but the title is actually Help Us. It is from a UU minister, Harry Chamberlain Meserve, who his dates were 1914 to 2000. From arrogance, pompousness, and from thinking ourselves more important than we are, may some saving sense of humor liberate us. For allowing ourselves to ridicule the faith of others, may we be forgiven. From making war and calling it peace, special privilege and calling it justice, indifference and calling it tolerance, pollution and calling it progress, may we be cured. For telling ourselves and others that evil is inevitable while good is impossible, may we stand corrected. God of our mixed up, tragic, aspiring, doubting, and insurgent lives, help us to be as good in our hearts as we have always wanted to be. Amen. And now, the very special period where we have the announcements of what we need to know. Who is going to be announcing stuff? I know there are always some. Selena, yes, all right.
I don't actually like doing announcements. I just want you to know. Anyway, okay, but this Wednesday is the first Wednesday of the month, and what does that mean? Yes, and which you can see actually on your bulletin. I just want to thank everybody responsible for putting a schedule in the bulletin. But yes, that's this coming Wednesday. For those of you who are regulars, or if you want to come, also, if you want to tell me what our theme should be for this coming Wednesday, please tell me. I'm in the middle of moving right now, and I need a little bit of instruction. But anyway, we'll meet then. 10 o'clock on Wednesday right here in the Fellowship Hall. There'll be coffee and goodies and really good conversation also. But thank you to everyone who joined us this morning for our adult study series on environmental justice. We talked about native plants today. Our speaker had to cancel at the last minute. She's from the Southern Environmental Law Center. Amanda Garcia was going to speak to us, but she had a death in her family. So hopefully she'll come back on August 14th in 2 weeks at 9:30 to speak to us. So please be here if you can. It's going to be very, very interesting. Next week, we're going to meet at 1 o'clock. So instead of meeting at 9:30, we're going to be here after church, and we're going to have a speaker come in from Nashville from the Tennessee Environmental Council. So that's going to be a great conversation too. Please join us for that. Also, if you'd like to help out with the light lunch that we'll provide in between our service and the study series, please let me know so we have enough food on offer. Bear that in mind. If you want to just stay and have something to eat, you can do that next Sunday, but you're going to learn a lot if you stay for our study series. I also heard there was a great summer night series last night. Yes? So if you'll just say Yahoo if you were there last night at the baseball game. Okay, yay. All right, so please pay attention to that in your newsletter as well. When is the next summer night series?
August 20th on a Saturday in the evening, going to a soccer game. So for all the ones who didn't understand last night
Yes, so luckily people were there to explain baseball to Christian last night, but on the 20th, we'll be going to a soccer game. Okay, so stay tuned for that. Anything else? I'm sorry? Yes, so Christian will be explaining soccer to you at that. If you'll explain football to him, then anyway. So thank you. Yes, there are also some vegetables in the back. Sandy is responsible for the hot peppers that are back there, which is no surprise. I know, but you know, she's distributing them for another party. There's some hot peppers back there. There's some sweet peppers, and there might be tomatoes and garlic and cucumbers left. I'm not sure, but feel free to take some vegetables, and feel free to throw some money into the offering plate that's right there, because that supports our adult education series. You don't have to give us any money, but if you can, hey, why not? All right.
Take as much as you want. We don't
Yes.
want to have to throw any vegetables in.
Exactly. We have too many. Good. I'm done. Oh.
Also on August 20th is Pam Johnson's ordination. Please RSVP. In the back, there's a sign-up sheet. This is our opportunity to celebrate someone who's been in this community for many, many years, getting the title Rev on our name tag, and just supporting a new transition in this church of having an affiliated minister. So it'll be really exciting. We can have ordination and then soccer, like a whole day of church. And then you'll come on Sunday too, right? Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, any other announcements? I guess I want to thank Selena for setting the hour at a civil time next week. Dady and I will plan to be there. And gosh, that game last night was incredible. The Lookouts scored 5 runs in the 9th to walk it off, and we all went crazy. All right. So I think if there are no more announcements, it's coffee time. Thank you all for coming.